Hi, Brigitte and Amelia. I'm so happy you were able to join me here today. Thanks again for doing this food journal. It really helps me get a little bit more insight about what things may need to be changed in order for Amelia to have the most beneficial, healthy, nutritious diet. So I know that you've made a lot of changes recently based on Amelia's new diagnosis with Lyme disease. Definitely helpful that you guys have made that transition to a gluten-free diet as well as trying to eliminate some dairy in the diet. Definitely beneficial for eliminating some of the inflammatory things that Amelia has been eating in the past. The gluten, as you know, and the dairy will ultimately add to that kind of inflammatory response in the body. And with the Lyme disease, you definitely want to have that elimination of inflammatory foods because it definitely plays a role and takes a toll on the joints, and it can often lead to very painful symptoms for Amelia, and we don't want that. So, very nutritious diet, awesome with a lot of gluten-free bread. I know that you're trying to cut out some of the gluten, but it's definitely still hard to kind of cut out all of those foods that do contain gluten, including bread, pastas. What else was Amelia eating that had gluten in it? Oh, I know even meatballs can include some gluten with the breadcrumbs. So I think you guys have been doing a great job so far. It seems that Amelia definitely has to incorporate vegetables in her diet with carrots as a snack. She's eating broccoli and asparagus with pasta. That was great. Yeah, definitely. And it seems like she has some beneficial fats in her diet from the peanut butter, coconut milk. That's awesome. Um, and I know that you guys kind of eat a little bit of Portuguese food with your traditional style of cooking, Bridget. It's definitely awesome that you're incorporating your ethnicity into all of the foods that you're cooking. I'm sure they're very, very delicious. I noticed that you guys are eating a lot of brown rice and beans with chicken, so I'm sure that's one of the dishes that you have grown up loving. Um, After I reviewed Amelia's diet, I did enter it into the USDA myplate.org. And some of the recommendations that came back, which were interesting, was that Amelia should be consuming about 1,600 calories per day. And based on her food journal that you guys provided to me, she is going over that a little bit. I know that Amelia is very active and she's frequently playing sports or even running around with her friends, but ultimately to keep that healthy weight that she's at right now, you definitely want to aim for that 1,600 calorie mark when each day when you're consuming her food or preparing her food. I'm sorry. But something that two things that popped up as over the target area, as well as the calories, were added sugars and saturated fat. So for Amelia, added sugars, I know with the bread and with some of the snacking that she's doing, pumpkin bread and jello snacks, it's difficult to keep those added sugars down. But I know that you are working toward that, in being that the added sugars can ultimately flare up that inflammatory response and cause Amelia to feel some joint pain, in a sense. I know that you probably are questioning how could these added sugars be getting into all of these foods when bread, sugar in bread sounds interesting, but the sugars ultimately are coming from the carbohydrates in the bread. So you definitely want to be sure that you're reading all of the nutrition labels, all of the ingredients. I did put some helpful tips in here about looking at some ingredients that may seem like they're not sugars, but they ultimately are, like rice syrup. That could definitely be a sugar. Those companies definitely trick you with all their names. So what else do we have? Oh, corn syrup, barley malt, dextrose, maltose. You just want to be wary of those when reading the food labels and the nutrition facts, just to be sure that you're keeping those added sugars at a minimum. I know that you do cook a lot at home for Amelia and you do prepare a lot of the baked goods for her. So it's awesome that you kind of have an eye over all of those things. But you ultimately want to be using the most nutritious sugar alternatives because you don't want to continue to use white sugar or refined sugar. That's not beneficial to Amelia at all. Some healthy alternatives for that would be dates or maple syrup when you're incorporating those in the baked good recipes that you're making for her. I noticed that you made some pumpkin bread, which is great for the season, but definitely choosing some alternative sugars in order to reduce that inflammatory response for Amelia. And then, interestingly enough, saturated fat came back as over the target area for Amelia. I noticed that some of her saturated fat contents were coming from the peanut butter that she had been consuming, as well as the coconut milk that you use within her shake. I did give you some recommendations in her printout. I think that it could be beneficial for you to maybe swap out almond butter. Almond butter definitely has a lot less saturated fat content. Definitely still has fat, but those are healthy fats that Amelia ultimately needs to kind of lubricate those joints with her Lyme disease. You want to keep that stable. Also, if you wanted to swap out almond milk for the coconut milk, that's also a great alternative for her. Some other vitamins and minerals that came back as out of range for Amelia, she wasn't getting enough in her daily intake, were calcium, potassium, phosphorus, vitamin A, vitamin B12, vitamin D, vitamin E, and choline. So those are all things that you would like to be aware of when preparing Amelia's meals. I know that you have a great hands-on experience with that since she is homeschooled. You are typically making all of her meals, and you guys don't frequently eat out, so that's awesome that you kind of have that watch over everything that she's eating. In order to boost her calcium intake, I did give you some recommendations to include some dark leafy greens into her diet. I know that you are trying to stay away from dairy as it is an inflammatory for the Lyme disease, but some dark leafy greens that would be good for Amelia to incorporate would be collard greens, kale, as well as almond milk, which I had mentioned before for the saturated fat. So switching from coconut milk to almond milk would be good for her. Also, for the potassium and vitamin A, I recommended to add in some sweet potatoes. I do have a helpful recipe in here for you, sweet potato pie shake. So I know that Amelia does sometimes have protein shakes, so you can make that with sweet potato and almond milk, and there's some pecans in there, helpful to, and then you add in the protein. So it's helpful to incorporate sweet potatoes for the potassium, vitamin A, and then almond milk to reduce the saturated fats and boost the calcium. Let's see. Oh, and I know that Amelia had mentioned that mashed potatoes were one of her favorite meals, so I did recommend switching to sweet potato mashed potatoes in order to boost that vitamin A and potassium as well. So phosphorus, which is a beneficial mineral to keep the strong bones and healthy joints. I recommended adding in some sunflower seeds, tuna, or even grass-fed beef and almonds. Those are all great sources of phosphorus, as well as broccoli, which I know Amelia had eaten in her food diary, so just kind of boosting that broccoli intake would be awesome. Let's see, what else? Vitamin B12, excuse me. So I know that there wasn't too much protein sources in Amelia's food journal. I noticed that there was some chicken in the meals, and then there was meatballs, but I think that it might be beneficial for Amelia to incorporate some fish into her diet. So I did recommend salmon, tuna. Awesome. Cool. So then I also recommended for vitamin D to boost Amelia's levels of vitamin D to get out and play more, get out in that sun. And then for the vitamin E and choline, I'm also recommending for her to add in some more sunflower seeds and almonds, as well as Brussels sprouts. So in order for Amelia to add in all of these things into her diet, I did give you some recipe recommendations, and they're all there. If you have any questions, let me know.